Her mother looked me straight in the eye, her expression cold, controlled, like she had rehearsed this moment 100 times before I even walked into the room. "She's carrying twins," she said evenly, "but they're not yours. Let's not make this mess any worse. We'll wire 5 million to your account by morning. You just need to sign the papers and disappear." For a second, the silence in that room felt heavier than the words themselves. Most men would have reacted instantly. Anger. Shock. Maybe even desperation. But I didn't give them any of that. Instead, I smiled. A small, calm smile that caught all of them off guard. "Congratulations," I said. Her mother blinked, clearly not expecting that response. Her father shifted slightly, watching me like he was waiting for the real reaction to come out. Like this was just the calm before the storm. But there was no storm. Not today. I picked up the pen without hesitation and signed the divorce papers. No pause. No questions. Just ink meeting paper like it was nothing more than a routine transaction. Because to me, that's exactly what it was. I slid the papers back across the table. Her father stepped forward, studying my face carefully, as if trying to figure out what game I was playing. Then he extended his hand. I shook it firmly. "Pleasure doing business," I said. That made him hesitate for just a fraction of a second. "Good." Then I turned around and walked out of that mansion without looking back. Not at the marble floors, not at the expensive art, and definitely not at the life I was supposedly leaving behind. Because the truth was, I wasn't leaving anything valuable. "Hi," I'd say if anyone ever asked. "My name is Noah Carter. And I don't shout when I lose. I walk." But what no one understood at that moment was simple: I hadn't lost. Not even close. A week later, I was on a flight to Lisbon. No press. No announcements. No dramatic exits. Just distance. Back home, the story spread exactly how they wanted it to. That I had been paid off. That I was weak. That I had been quietly removed from a life I didn't deserve. And I let them believe it. I let Lily Harrington continue planning her perfect wedding. I let her fiancé smile like he had won something meaningful. I let her family sit comfortably in the illusion that money had solved everything. But what none of them asked, what none of them even thought about, was why I signed those papers so fast. Why I didn't argue. Why I didn't fight. Because while they were busy controlling the narrative, I was quietly building mine. No one noticed the nurse I tipped at the hospital the same night Lily confessed everything. No one paid attention to the DNA sample I submitted just 2 hours after she admitted the affair. To them, I was already gone. Irrelevant. Erased. But I was still very much present. Just invisible. Days passed. Then weeks. Everything moved forward like nothing had happened. Wedding rehearsals were planned. Venues decorated. Invitations finalized. A perfect story, on the surface. Until the moment I had been waiting for. The envelope arrived exactly on time. Delivered straight into the middle of the rehearsal. Lily opened it casually at first. Then everything changed. Her face drained of color. Her hands began to shake. And then, she screamed. The sound cut through the room like glass breaking. Conversations stopped instantly. The violinist froze mid-note. Her sister dropped her champagne glass. Every eye turned toward her. "Is this a joke?" she snapped, turning toward her fiancé, Daniel Reeves. But the damage had already begun. And I wasn't there to see it. I was sitting in a quiet cafe in Porto, sipping espresso, watching the river flow like nothing in the world had changed. But everything had. And this time, I was the one in control. My phone vibrated against the table, breaking the calm rhythm of the cafe. I glanced at the screen and saw a name I had been expecting. Lily Harrington. Right on time. I picked up the phone and answered, but I didn't say a word. I let the silence stretch, knowing she wouldn't be able to handle it. Noah, her voice came through, sharp and shaking at the same time. What the hell is this? I lifted my espresso slowly, taking a calm sip before responding. The truth, I said. There was a pause on the other end. Not silence, panic. The kind that builds when reality doesn't match the story you've been telling yourself. You had no right, she snapped, her tone rising. You had absolutely no right to do this to me. I leaned back in my chair, watching the golden light reflect off the river. I had every right, I replied evenly. I was your husband. That hit her. I could hear it in her breathing, the way it faltered for just a second before she tried to regain control. You're trying to ruin me, she said, quieter now, but more dangerous. I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. No, Lily. I didn't ruin you, I said. You did that all by yourself. I just made sure the truth showed up on time. Her anger came back instantly. You think you're smart. You think you've won something here. I smiled slightly. No, I said. I think you're predictable. And that was the difference between us. She reacted. I planned. Back at the rehearsal, everything was falling apart faster than anyone could contain it. The room that had been filled with laughter just minutes earlier was now buzzing with whispers. Guests huddled in corners, phones in hand, reading the report, zooming in on details, exchanging looks that said more than words ever could. Daniel Reeves stood frozen. His face had lost all color, his confidence completely gone. He kept refreshing his phone like the answer might suddenly change if he looked enough times. But it wouldn't. Because the DNA report wasn't unclear. It was devastating. It didn't say the twins were mine. It didn't say they were his. It said something far worse. They weren't anyone's in that room. Not mine. Not Daniel's. No one. Lily tried to regain control of the situation. This is fake, she said loudly, forcing strength into her voice. This has to be fake. Someone is trying to set me up. But even as she spoke, doubt was already spreading. Her bridesmaids weren't standing as close to her anymore. Her sister avoided eye contact. Even her own mother looked shaken. Because when lies stack on top of lies, they eventually collapse under their own weight. Daniel finally spoke, his voice unsteady. Lily, what is this? He asked. She turned toward him quickly. It's not real. You have to believe me. But belief requires trust. And trust had already been destroyed. I didn't need to send the report to the media. I didn't need to expose her publicly. That part took care of itself. In her panic, her mother forwarded the report to the wrong contact. A simple mistake. One wrong email thread. And that was enough. Within hours, screenshots began circulating. Private messages turned into public gossip. And by the next morning, tabloids had already picked it up. Elite wedding scandal explodes after DNA revelation. Meanwhile, I stayed exactly where I was. Portugal. Far from the noise. Far from the chaos. untouched by the storm I had just set in motion. I didn't celebrate. I didn't call anyone. I didn't explain anything. Because silence is far more powerful when people know it's intentional. By the time the wedding was officially postponed, the damage was already irreversible. Speculation spread everywhere. People guessed everything: secret affairs, surrogacy, hidden relationships. But the truth was simpler than all of that. And much worse. Lily didn't know who the father was. Because during our marriage, she hadn't just betrayed me once. She had done it multiple times. With different men. Different lies. Different versions of herself. And now, every single one of those lies was catching up to her at the same time. And this was only the beginning. Because I hadn't even made my final move yet. The media storm didn't slow down. It grew. What started as whispers inside a rehearsal hall had now turned into a full-blown public spectacle. News outlets picked it up. Gossip pages dissected every detail. Social media turned it into entertainment. Everyone had a theory. But no one had the full truth. Not yet. Back at the Harrington estate, damage control was in full effect. Phones rang non-stop. Lawyers were called in. PR teams scrambled to contain the narrative before it spiraled further out of control. But the problem with the truth is, once it leaks, it doesn't go back. Lily was no longer the center of admiration. She was the center of suspicion. Her so-called perfect image was cracking in front of everyone. And the more she tried to fix it, the worse it looked. Daniel Reeves didn't stay long. By early morning, he was gone. No statement. No explanation. Not even a confrontation. Just silence. His social media accounts disappeared overnight. His phone was unreachable. And by the time anyone realized what had happened, he was already on a flight out of the country. Running. Because deep down, he knew something no one else had fully accepted yet. This wasn't just a scandal. It was a collapse. Meanwhile, the truth continued to unfold. Piece by piece. Layer by layer. Until it reached the part no one was prepared for. Lily hadn't just been involved with one man. Or even two. There were three. 3 different men, all completely unaware of each other. One was a nightclub investor, wealthy, discreet, used to operating in shadows. Another was her family's financial advisor, a man trusted with everything from assets to secrets. The third. A valet at her favorite spa. Someone invisible. Someone no one would ever suspect. And somehow, all 3 of them had been part of the same lie. None of them were me. And none of them were Daniel. Which meant one thing. The twins didn't belong to anyone standing in that room that night. Back in Portugal, I watched everything unfold from a distance. I didn't interfere. I didn't react. I simply observed. Because this wasn't about revenge. It was about timing. And timing is everything. 3 days after the leak, my phone rang again. This time, I didn't need to check the screen. I already knew who it was. I answered. Noah, the voice came true, deeper this time, heavier. Victor Harrington. Lily's father. We need to talk. I didn't respond immediately. I let the silence stretch just long enough to remind him that things had changed. You should have thought about that earlier, I said calmly. A pause. Then, more controlled, we made a mistake. I almost laughed. You made several. His breathing was steady, but there was something underneath it now: pressure. Urgency. "I want to fix this," he said. That made me smile. Because now, we were finally getting to the part one had been waiting for. "You think this is still a negotiation?" I asked. "It can be," he replied quickly. I leaned forward slightly, resting my elbow on the table. "What do you want?" he asked. "Simple. Direct. Desperate. Perfect." I looked out over the river one more time before answering. "I want the company your daughter thought she'd inherit," I said. "And I want it clean." Silence. Longer this time. He didn't interrupt. Didn't argue. Didn't try to negotiate immediately. Because he understood exactly what I was asking for. Everything. "And if we give it to you," he finally said. I didn't hesitate. "I walk away," I replied. "No press. No interviews. No more tests. This ends quietly." He exhaled slowly. Like a man calculating loss. Not emotional loss. Financial loss. Reputation loss. Legacy loss. That company wasn't just business. It was history. Generations of power, built over decades. And now, it was sleeping. Because of one mistake. No. Because of many. "I'll have the papers drafted," he said finally. And just like that, the power shifted completely. I leaned back in my chair, finishing my drink. Because now the truth wasn't just catching up. It was collecting payment. And this time, I was the one setting the price. 2 days later, I walked into a private boardroom overlooking the city skyline. No cameras. No media. No celebration. Just silence. The kind of silence that follows something irreversible. Victor Harrington was already there, seated at the far end of the table. He looked different now. Not weaker, but worn. Like a man who had aged years in just a few days. In front of him sat a stack of documents. Between us, everything that mattered. "You're on time," he said, his tone flat. "I don't waste time," I replied. That used to impress him. Now it just reminded him who he was dealing with. The lawyers were present, but quiet. Observing. Waiting. No one spoke unless necessary. This wasn't a negotiation anymore. This was execution. Victor slid the documents toward me. "Full ownership transfer," he said. "Effective immediately. Your name replaces ours on all controlling shares." I flipped through the pages slowly, not because I needed to, but because I wanted him to sit in that moment a little longer. Every signature line. Every clause. Every detail. Years of legacy, reduced to paperwork. "Her name?" I asked without looking up. "Removed from everything," he replied. No hesitation. No emotion. Just acceptance. I sign. One page after another. Ink on paper. Simple. Final. With every signature, the balance shifted further. By the time I finished, the company that was once destined for Lily Harrington was mine. Completely. When I stood up, Victor didn't. He stayed seated, staring at the table like he was trying to process how everything had slipped out of his hands so quickly. "You're doing the right thing," I said. He didn't respond. Because we both knew this wasn't about right or wrong anymore. This was about damage control. And I was the only option left. That night, my phone rang again. I already knew who it was. I answered. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then her voice came through. Soft. Broken. You win, Lily whispered. I didn't respond immediately. Not because I didn't have something to say, but because I didn't need to. Finally, I spoke. This was never about winning. She let out a quiet, bitter laugh. Of course it was. No, I said calmly. This was about making sure you never erase me again. Silence filled the line. This time, heavier. Because deep down, she knew I was telling the truth. The media didn't stop. If anything, it got worse. The headlines shifted. From her scandal, to me. Questions started spreading everywhere. Why had I left the country? Why had I stayed silent? And most importantly, how did I suddenly take control of a multi-generational empire? Speculation exploded. But I didn't respond. I didn't post. I didn't explain. Because silence is louder when people know it's a choice. Inside the company, things move fast. I didn't waste time settling in. I made changes immediately. The leadership team was the first to go. Anyone Lily had supported, anyone placed their true loyalty instead of competence, removed. No drama. No warnings. Just decisions. Operations were restructured, outdated systems replaced, unnecessary assets sold off without hesitation. Some called it ruthless. I called it necessary. Victor had held onto certain parts of the business out of pride. Tradition. Ego. I didn't. If something didn't serve the future, it didn't stay. Within 60 days, the results spoke for themselves. The strongest quarter the company had seen in 5 years. Profit margins up. Operational costs down. Investor confidence restored. But that wasn't what shook them the most. What really hit them was what I did next. I called for a rebranding. Not a small one. A complete reset. New identity. New direction. New name. Because this company was no longer theirs. Not in any way that mattered. The board questioned it at first. Carefully. Cautiously. But no one pushed too hard. Because they had all seen what happened when someone underestimated me. A week later, the announcement went public. The old name was gone. Erased. Replaced with something simple. Something intentional. Something that meant everything. Carter and Sons. Not because I had children. Not yet. But because one day I would. And when that day came, they wouldn't inherit scandal. They would inherit strength. And just like that, the past was no longer something I carried. It was something I replaced. The rebranding didn't just change the company's name. It changed everything. Carter and Sons wasn't tied to old money, hidden scandals, or whispered deals behind closed doors. It was clean. Direct. Intentional. And that made people uncomfortable. Because legacy can hide flaws. But a fresh start. That exposes everything. The press couldn't stop talking about it. From outsider to owner overnight. The man who rewrote the ending. Scandal turns into strategy. They tried to figure me out. Tried to break down every move, every decision, every silence. But they couldn't. Because they were looking for emotion. And I was operating on logic. Inside the company, resistance came quietly at first. A few senior executives, people who had been loyal to the Harrington name for decades, started questioning decisions behind closed doors. They didn't like the speed of change. They didn't trust me. And honestly, I didn't expect them to. Trust isn't given. It's forced by results. So I didn't argue. I didn't convince. I replaced. One by one, anyone who hesitated too long was removed. Not out of anger. Out of necessity. Because hesitation at that level, it costs millions. At the same time, I started building something new. A leadership team that didn't rely on history. People who understood growth, not tradition. Technology, not ego. Execution, not reputation. Operations moved online. Processes were streamlined. All contracts, especially the ones that benefited relationships instead of results, were terminated. It wasn't personal. It was business. Within weeks, numbers began to shift. Within a month, investors started paying attention again. And within 60 days, we posted the strongest Q1 the company had seen in 5 years. That's when the noise changed. Criticism turned into curiosity. Doubt turned into attention. And attention, it turned into respect. But just when everything started stabilizing, my phone buzzed again. A message. From Lily. I stared at the screen for a moment before opening it. Just one line. You don't get to rewrite history. I read it once. Then I deleted it. No reply. No reaction. Because history isn't protected by opinion. It's shaped by outcome. A few days later, her family made their final move. An emergency legal injunction. Their last attempt to regain control. They claim that I had manipulated Lily during our marriage. That the DNA test was falsified. That I had pressured Victor into signing over the company during a moment of emotional instability. It was weak. Predictable. Desperate. But it wasn't about winning. It was about delaying. Slowing things down. Creating doubt. Buying time. Unfortunately for them, I had already planned for that. My legal team filed a response within 24 hours. Not just a defense. A counterattack. Documented. Dated. Verified. Every conversation. Every agreement. Every signature they thought no one had kept. I had everything. Messages. Financial records. Authorization documents. Even voice recordings. All legally obtained. All impossible to deny. Because while they were operating on assumption, I was operating on evidence. The hearing didn't last long. It didn't need to. The judge reviewed both sides carefully, then adjusted her glasses and looked directly at their attorney. One question. Simple. Sharp. Are you prepared to be countersued for defamation under oath? Silence. That kind of silence only happens when someone realizes they've already lost. The case was dismissed that same afternoon. Just like that. Finished. Their final move backfired. I didn't celebrate. Didn't call anyone. Didn't even smile. I just walked out of the courthouse, loosened my tie, and took a slow breath. For the first time in a long time, everything was quiet. They had tried to erase me. Remove me from the story. Rewrite everything like I never mattered. But now, they couldn't escape it. Because everywhere they turned, they would see my name. And this time, it wasn't going anywhere. The days that followed were quieter than I expected, but no less intense. The company now under my control moved forward like a living entity, fast, decisive, and unforgiving. Every department, every team, every process felt the shift. Where hesitation had once lingered, efficiency now ruled. Where loyalty had been purchased, competence became the currency. I spent my mornings reviewing operations, my afternoons restructuring leadership, and my evenings planning the future. Every decision was deliberate. Every action had purpose. I wasn't here to punish anyone, I was here to correct decades of complacency and entitlement. Investors noticed. Within weeks, confidence returned. Shares stabilized. Contracts that had been stuck in limbo were finalized. Vendors and partners who had been skeptical of my ability to take control started adjusting their expectations. And quietly, silently, the company began to thrive. But the true impact wasn't in the numbers. It was in perception. Inside the company, whispers started to circulate. People realized that the old rules no longer applied. The Harrington legacy wasn't guiding the ship anymore, I was. And that made them uneasy. I didn't make a show of power. No speeches. No declarations. Just quiet, calculated changes. Systems were updated. Redundant departments merged or eliminated. Roles that were purely symbolic were reassigned or removed. Slowly, methodically, I rebuilt the company from the inside out. Meanwhile, my personal life remained intentionally invisible. Lily Harrington tried in subtle ways to reach me, but I ignored her messages. One line here, one desperate email there. She thought she could pull me back into her world, but I had long since stepped outside it. I wasn't interested in her apologies, her explanations, or her attempts to manipulate. Her story no longer affected me. Her family, however, was still trying to cope with the fallout. Victor Harrington had withdrawn entirely. The Harrington name had lost credibility in business circles, and there was nothing they could do to reclaim it. Every misstep they made, every failed attempt at controlling the narrative, only highlighted my strategic patience and resolve. I began quietly recognizing the people who had helped me along the way. The nurse who had discreetly helped me get the DNA sample. The friend who assisted me in disappearing for a week while the story unraveled. The attorney who had trusted me when everyone else doubted. They weren't interested in fame, or recognition, or reward. But I made sure they were remembered in ways no one else would notice: scholarships in their names, small business grants, quiet contributions. By the time 2 months had passed, Carter & Sons was not only financially stable but also operationally stronger than it had been in years. The shift in leadership was complete. The public narrative had turned from scandal to strategic brilliance. And all the while, I stayed invisible to the press, allowing the results to speak louder than any story. Then one crisp autumn morning, I walked into the same cafe in Porto where I had first watched Lily's world unravel. The place had changed hands, but the atmosphere felt familiar. As I paid for my coffee, the barista looked up and said, "You're him, right? From the articles." I smiled faintly. "Depends on what they said." "They said you didn't lose everything. You just took the long way to something better." I nodded once. That was the truth. I never needed to ruin her. She had destroyed her own credibility long before I had made a single move. All I had done was wait, observe, and act with precision. Sometimes, the quietest victories are the most powerful. They don't come with applause or headlines, just results that speak for themselves. And that's exactly what I had achieved. I walked out of the cafe, the cool breeze against my face a reminder that for the first time in years, I was free. Free from lies, free from manipulation, free from a past that tried to dictate my future. And I knew, without doubt, that no one could ever take that freedom from me again. Because this time, I was in control. Completely. The story that was meant to erase me had ended up highlighting my strategy, patience, and foresight. And the Harringtons. They were left to pick up the pieces of their own mistakes. I had rewritten the rules, the narrative, and the legacy. And for the first time, everything felt mine, not true inheritance, not true entitlement, but true deliberate, calculated action. By the time part 7 begins, the dust had settled, but the story wasn't over. Not yet. The final act was about legacy, not revenge. The Harringtons had tried every trick, every loophole, every desperate legal maneuver to regain control or salvage reputation. They had failed. Every attempt only confirmed what I already knew: strategy always beats panic, patience always beats impulse, and truth always beats illusion. The emergency injunction they had filed. Dismissed. Every claim of coercion, manipulation, or falsification had been neutralized by the airtight documentation my attorneys had collected. Contracts, emails, recorded conversations, every piece of evidence proved that every move I had made was legal, justified, and deliberate. The judge's final ruling was clear: the case was closed. No appeals. No extensions. No further action. Done. I didn't celebrate in front of anyone. There was no gloating. No social media post. No headlines about the victor. I had already won, long before the ruling. The court had merely formalized what was already reality. Carter and Sons was mine. Fully. Clean. Undeniable. Inside the company, the change was tangible. People who had once doubted me now followed direction without hesitation. Initiatives I had postponed were finally implemented. Digital infrastructures replaced outdated analog systems. Redundant departments were streamlined, and any asset that no longer served growth was sold. Operations became lean, efficient, profitable. Within 60 days, quarterly results shattered records. Investor confidence skyrocketed. The press began to notice, of course, but I didn't give interviews. I let the results speak louder than any story could. The company had transitioned from scandal-tainted legacy to forward-focused powerhouse, and everyone, investors, stakeholders, even competitors, knew that this shift was deliberate, strategic, and permanent. Meanwhile, I quietly ensured that those who had helped me along the way were recognized in subtle but meaningful ways. The nurse who had given me access to the DNA sample, the friend who had helped me disappear when I needed distance, the attorney who had trusted me when no one else would, they were rewarded without publicity. Scholarships, grants, and quietly funded projects in their names became my way of honoring loyalty and courage. They never sought recognition, but I ensured their contributions were remembered. The Harringtons faded into irrelevance. Lily tried one last attempt at messaging me, one line, desperate, accusatory: "You don't get to rewrite history." I read it, smiled faintly, and deleted it. History isn't dictated by words, it's dictated by actions. By results. By survival. And I had proven that. Victor Harrington and his advisors quietly accepted that the empire they had planned for their daughter was now gone. The name Harrington would continue to exist, but its influence, its authority, its legacy, those had passed entirely into my hands. One crisp fall morning, I returned to Porto's Riverside Cafe, the same spot where I had first watched the chaos unfold. The barista recognized me instantly. "You're him, right? From the articles?" she asked. I nodded. "Depends on what they said. They said you didn't lose everything. You just took the long way to something better." I smiled faintly. That was the truth. I never needed to ruin anyone. They had done that themselves. I simply stayed still long enough for the truth to catch up. And then I walked away. Not away from the company. Not away from responsibility. But away from the petty games, the lies, the manipulations. The Horringtons had tried to erase me, but now their world was my stage, and I had rewritten the narrative entirely on my terms. The final lesson was clear: power isn't inherited. Influence isn't demanded. Legacy isn't preserved through wealth or connections alone. It's claimed. Strategically. Intentionally. Deliberately. And I had claimed it. Carter and Sons became more than a company. It became a symbol of resilience, strategy, and precision. Housing initiatives in underserved regions, partnerships with clean infrastructure startups, quietly funded scholarships, every action reinforced a legacy built on survival and foresight, not scandal. And as for me, I had ensured that when the next chapter arrived, when one day there would be children to inherit, it would be built on strength, not betrayal, on strategy, not impulse, on survival, not chaos. Because I didn't just walk away from a marriage, a scandal, or a family empire. I walked away into control. I walked away into clarity. I walked away into history, one I had chosen, written, and owned. And finally, no one could take it from me.